Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder, CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with the founder of Catalyst Sale, Mike Simmons. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jody.
All right, Mike. On this show, quite often, we talk about strategy and approach. That you're really good at that, but another thing you're good at is tactics. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This episode is going to be the first in a series of episodes about tactics. And the first one that we're going to tackle is call planning. Well, Mike, set us off here. Let's get started with call planning.
Well, call planning sounds really simple. And the reality is many people forget to do it. Or if they don't forget to do it, they can just wing it because they're creative, they're smart, they're intelligent, they can hold a conversation, they've got an idea of how they think the discussion is going to go. But I can tell you this, if you do not plan your calls effectively, you're setting yourself up for failure. What's the old Ben Franklin quote? Failure to plan is a plan to fail. That's what happens when you don't prepare for your calls effectively.
How many people do you think actually call plan? Is it more common to wing it?
I think it's more common to wing it. And I just based on a couple of calls that I've gotten recently, it seems like people will fall into one of two categories if they're not being strategic and thoughtful when it comes to call planning. The one category might be the script. So they just go through the same script, no matter who they're calling, whoever's going to pick up the phone on the other end, whoever they're getting involved with. Maybe they're delivering a demo to a customer. Maybe it's an initial introduction call. They've got their script that they need to follow through. And we've talked about the dangers of scripts and how that takes away the personality that the sales rep can deliver to the conversation. I think the other area is when they come in and they just wing it. And they say, well, I know that I'm going to talk to Jim, or I'm going to talk to Jane, or I'm going to talk to whomever. And I'll just start off by asking about the weather to see if I can build some rapport, and then go into my list of questions or take things in the direction that I plan on it.
Well, let's look at what you do, Mike. When it comes to call planning, how much do you do? I know you have a fondness for scripts. I'm just kidding. Mike Simmons does not care for call scripts. But what do you do when it comes for call planning?
So, and we'll include a link to this in the show notes. If you just go to catalystsale.com/call plan, you'll be able to download our call planning document. And that call planning document is really a template, not a script, but a template that provides an area for you to put general objectives, a list of the people who you're expecting on the call, some identified next steps, the things that you'd like to establish as next step items when you leave the call, and an area for questions, things that you'd like to answer throughout the course of the discussion. So we'll share that call plan, but my approach is to go through a couple of key questions. Who's going to be on the call? What are their expectations for the call? What are my expectations for the call? And what would be ideal? Like, what would I like to be able to establish as next steps? And that's the format that we use for the call planning template that we use.
I want to come back to this, but you said it's a template, not a script. We joke about scripts, but really, what's the difference between a template and a script?
Yeah, the way I would define the difference is I think a template is something that has guideposts. It has just kind of general guidelines or areas where you'd want to focus attention, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how to do it. It doesn't give you the specific timing on when certain questions would go through. It's not manufactured. So think of the call plan as the recipe that shows the ingredients, and then someone who might be using a script, it would be the specific directions on how to use all of those ingredients. And once you start getting into that script mode, you start to take the creativity away from the sales rep. You force someone to talk or convey a message in the same way that you want everybody else to talk or convey that message. In that instance, you start to create robots. So I'd summarize that by saying the planning template provides some guideposts. The script provides focused direction.
Okay, so back to the template. You mentioned you have 3 questions that you go through usually. So let's say you're going to have a call with me. Walk me through those 3 questions and how you might answer them, because I want to get us in the spirit of how this works, how planning works and using a template works.
Like we could go back in the way back machine where we had our first call about working with you to create the podcast. So the first thing I did is I knew who I was going to be speaking with. So I've got a little bit of information about Jody. I know based on your LinkedIn profile, who you are, what you do. I know that there's some information on your website that talks about what you're interested in, how you help organizations. And I've taken the time to listen to a couple of the podcasts that you're a host on. This gives me some background information about you above and beyond the kind of information that I could get if I just asked you directly. So this is that first part of research, which will give me some information about the type of person you are and how you like to communicate, so that I know, should I be really direct in the discussion, short, be bright, be brief, be gone, and to the point? Or should I start with things that are a little bit more touchy-feely or huggy, Pacific Northwest style?
I like that you included that. Well, when I interview someone for a podcast, I quite often will research a person, just like you said, and then I will come up with questions. And I find the more I do that, it doesn't make me read from a script. It helps me listen better and ask questions or not ask questions that could have easily been taken care of by doing just a little research, like you going to my LinkedIn profile. So I'm all for that. And I think just a little bit of research goes a long way in helping the questions that you ask beforehand. So if I remember right, you say, who are you talking to? And then what do you want to get out of the call? So tell us about that one.
Yeah. And the first one, and I might have messed up in my order. I will have to go back and listen to the recording and see if I said, what do I want to get out of the call versus what do they want to get out of the call? But this next piece is more about, let's just create some pretty clear call objectives. So when we had that first conversation, my first objective was determine, will we be able to build some rapport with each other? Are you just some talking head on a podcast who sounds interesting and sounds conversational and sounds like a good person? Or is that a persona that you're delivering out into the marketplace? And when I talk to you, you don't really know what you're talking about, or you don't really have the background that it seems like you have. So one of my objectives in that first call was to figure out, is Jody who he says he is? Are you who you say you are? Or are you somebody completely different?
Have you figured that out yet?
It's like, it's like a relationship or a fine wine. It kind of gets better with age, but sometimes you do take 2 steps forward and you take 1 step backward. But yeah, I think things have worked out so far.
Okay. So I interrupted you a little bit. You said that was one objective.
Yeah. So that was one objective. And again, it's not that here are the specific questions I'm going to ask Jody to determine if Jody is really who he is. I'm going to try to have a general conversation. Now, the other objective that I might want to accomplish out of the call is that maybe this is an initial call. So my goal with the call is if I've determined that it makes sense for us to continue the conversation, my goal is to get that next call, to have some kind of call to action where I can get validation that they're interested in continuing the discussion. So one of my objectives might be to schedule a discussion to talk about the logistics for setting up how to kick off a podcast. So I've got the first objective, which is figure out if you're a good person, someone that I could work with. Second one is schedule a discussion to get the logistics in place to set up the podcast. And if I can accomplish those 2 objectives, then the call is going to be positive for me. I won't make it to the second one if we don't get through the first gate. And if I can get to the second gate, that means that there's some interest in moving things forward. Now, another part of this is figuring out what is it that you want to get out of the call? How can I anticipate the objective that you have? Now, you have a service, you provide a service. So one of the objectives might be to determine, well, actually, let me ask you, in your first call that you have with someone, if they're the one who conducts the outreach to you, what is one of your objectives when you take that call?
Well, since we're talking about our first call together, I'll talk about that one. Is I know if I'm going to do a podcast with somebody, it's different than some of the other things I do with prospective clients. If I'm going to do a podcast with somebody, it has to be somebody that I'm going to enjoy, because you have to pour a lot into each other to do a podcast together. You have to be able to have banter and get down to business. And you have to have fun. It's usually also a long-term relationship, because podcasts go on for a while, usually. So one of the things I'm looking for is, when we were first talking, I was also feeling you out, saying, okay, is this somebody I would be interested in working with on long-term, week after week? So that's the most important part to me when I have those sort of calls. Now, if it's for one of the other services I do, maybe it's completely different what I'm looking for. But in that case, that's it. I know it's going to be long-term, and I know I have to really enjoy you for me to do my best.
Yeah. So you didn't want to get married on the first date, did you?
No, not at all. Not at all. That was one of the parts is I don't think either one of us in that situation were looking for a commitment that first time we talked.
Yeah. And so I know we've got people out there that are listening to this, and some of you are taking notes and you're saying, well, hey, I want to close the deal. Depending on the kind of business you're in, closing a deal on that first call is probably not an ideal best step. I mean, that's going to be more about you and less about your customer. So this piece that we're talking about, a key takeaway that you should have is, if I focus on what's important to my customer and what's important to the person on the other end of the call, and I kind of put my objectives at a lower priority or on the back burner, then I'm going to take a much more service-oriented approach to that discussion. And I think that comes across in each of those discussions you have with people. I know I've been on calls where a sales rep has called me and they put me through their 20 questions, their 20 qualification gauntlet questions. And I quickly wonder, is this call for my benefit or is the call for their benefit? And if you think that the benefit that your customer is getting is, well, they're going to be really excited when they hear more about what I have to offer, more of the features and benefits that I have inside my product, then you're mistaken. So don't take that approach. Take an approach where it's more customer oriented, customer focused. So we talked about a couple of things here. One, we've talked about doing the initial research so that you've got the context and you can frame the questions that you ask on the call. The second one is being really clear about what your objectives are, and also what the person on the other end's objectives are. Because ideally, at the end of the call, both of you should feel like, well, that was a valuable use of time.
Yeah, I like looking at it that way. So since we're talking call planning and we're in the Wayback Machine talking about our first call, how could that have gone differently if you hadn't done any planning ahead of time? What could have happened on that call?
I can't remember the last time I went into a call where I didn't do planning, so I have a really hard time getting my head around that. But I guess what could have happened is I may have asked the wrong questions and gotten myself into a situation where I just assumed that you knew what you were doing, but I wasn't able to build the kind of rapport that we built on that first call. So Jody, this is one of those things I really struggle with. If I don't, this is such an important aspect to the work that we all do as sales professionals and as we do as human beings, that if we're not putting in some upfront work, we are getting ourselves into a situation where we might have a lot of risk that we either waste people's time, we get the wrong information, or at the end of the call, we realize, oh crap, I should have asked that.
Yeah, I think you are right there. And if I look at our first call, since I was the one that had the service that solved your problem, if I just had a script that I walked through, I know you're the one that called me, but if I had a script that I walked through on everybody that talked to me about doing a podcast, I probably wouldn't find out if you were someone I wanted to work with long term. And yeah, I may find out what your objectives were and what you hope to accomplish, but I just don't know if a script can uncover some of the things, because you may say something and I say, oh, I need to know a little more about that and figure out what Mike's really got going on here. So I think this planning is so much more important than a script, because you're not just checking off numbers. You're not saying, okay, I made my 10 calls, although maybe that's important to make a certain level of calls, but you've got to plan it, not script it. And I really enjoy what you're putting out here, Mike.
And Jody, I think another thing that you can do when you take this approach is you can start to anticipate the direction that the conversation is going to go. And if in the course of the discussion, the conversation is not going in the direction that you anticipate, then something might be wrong. Either you're talking to the wrong person, you're conveying the wrong message, their timing is completely different, or maybe they're just so early stage that that the follow-up discussion, instead of it being some clear next steps that you established before, it might be a next step that's focused more on educating that person about what's happening in a given market. And if you stay so focused on the script, on those 20 questions, those 20 qualification questions, or even the 4 qualification questions around, are you the key decision maker? What budget do you have? How many people are in your organization? All that kind of stuff, you lose the potential to uncover other potential opportunities. So be really careful about that.
Yes. Well, Mike, we're coming up here to the end of the episode. What other advice do you have for us on call planning?
Well, so I think the other thing that I just would want to wrap up on is be really clear about what success means to you. So does success mean to you that the person on the other end was engaged in the discussion and that they asked for the follow-up meeting, or they asked for the follow-up discussion? Does success mean to you that they agreed to a next step? They agreed to a meeting? Does success mean to you that they actually agreed to introduce you to somebody else inside their network? Be really clear about your criteria for success. Another component that I would also add, in addition to being really deliberate about what success looks like, give yourself more time than you anticipate. Now, remember, if you're going to go ahead and schedule a call with someone for 15 minutes, stay to the 15 minutes. So don't try to bring 30 minutes of questions into that discussion. If you're scheduled for 30 minutes, try to keep that to 25 minutes, where you can keep a little bit of extra time at the end to handle things that surprised you or things that you didn't anticipate were coming up. Be very respectful of the time that you book with others. Set expectations and execute flawlessly. Just another reminder, download the call plan document from the website. We'll include that in the show notes. And I really look forward to hearing how you apply these concepts in your work.
Yes, don't forget to download that call plan. This will really drive home what we've talked about here on this episode. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.